On the day the divorce was finalized, Elena Cross didn't cry. She signed the papers with steady hands, her expression calm, almost detached, as though she were concluding a business transaction rather than ending a marriage that had once dominated every corner of her life. Across the polished mahogany table, Alexander Blackwood, billionaire CEO, media magnate, and her husband of 5 years, watched her with a sharpness that bordered on disbelief. He had expected anger, tears, accusations. He had not expected silence. "Is that it?" Alexander asked, his voice low, controlled. "You're not going to say anything?" Elena slid the final document toward the attorney and rose from her chair. "There's nothing left to say." Her voice was soft but final, carrying the weight of a decision made long ago. Alexander stood abruptly. 5 years, Elena. 5 years, and you're walking away like it meant nothing?" She finally looked at him then, really looked at him. The man the world feared and admired in equal measure. The man who had once promised her the world and then slowly replaced love with control, absence, and expectations she could never meet. "It meant everything," she said quietly. "That's why I'm leaving." And with that, she walked out of the room, and out of his life, or so she thought. 3 months later, Elena Cross officially ceased to exist. At least that was how it felt. She left the city, changed her phone number, deleted her social media, and moved to a quiet coastal town where no one knew the name Blackwood. She cut her hair shorter, traded designer dresses for linen and cotton, and found a small job managing a seaside bookshop owned by an elderly woman who asked no questions. For the first time in years, Elena could breathe. No headlines, no scrutiny, no expectations of being Alexander Blackwood's wife. She woke early, walked barefoot along the shore, and rediscovered the parts of herself she had buried to survive a marriage that demanded perfection but offered loneliness in return. At night, however, the memories came uninvited. Alexander's voice, his intensity, the way he used to look at her as though she were the only thing that mattered, until his empire demanded more of him than she ever could. She reminded herself why she left. She had not disappeared out of weakness. She had disappeared to survive. Alexander Blackwood did not take loss well. He had built his empire on acquisition, companies, influence, power. Nothing left his grasp unless he allowed it, and Elena's disappearance ignited something dark and unfamiliar within him. He searched, quietly at first, then obsessively. Private investigators returned empty-handed. Financial trails vanished, credit cards unused, no digital footprint. It was as if she had dissolved into the world deliberately, methodically. "She doesn't want to be found," his head of security said carefully. Alexander's jaw tightened. "That's what she thinks." He replayed their marriage in his mind, dissecting moments he had dismissed at the time. Her silence at events, the way she stopped arguing, the nights she waited awake for him without complaint. He had mistaken her endurance for contentment. That mistake haunted him. "She was mine," he muttered one night, staring out over the city skyline from his penthouse. "And I let her walk away." But regret didn't soften him. It sharpened his resolve. Elena's new life was fragile but precious. The bookshop smelled of salt air and old paper. Customers were few but kind. She learned their names, their habits, their quiet stories. No one asked about her past. No one cared that she had once shared a bed with one of the most powerful men in the world. For the first time, she was simply Elena. Until the letter arrived. No return address, thick cream paper, one line of handwriting she would recognize anywhere. "You can run, you can hide, but you were never meant to disappear from my life." Her hands trembled as she read it again. Alexander. Her chest tightened with a mix of anger, fear, and something far more dangerous, familiar longing. "He found me," she whispered. That night, she packed a bag, prepared to leave again. She had promised herself she would never let him pull her back into his orbit, but fate had other plans. Alexander stood across the street from the bookshop 2 days later, watching through the window as Elena laughed softly at something an elderly customer said. She looked different, lighter, freer, and it destroyed him. "There you are," he murmured. The divorce had severed their legal bond, but not the invisible thread that tied them together. Not the obsession, not the unfinished truths, not the love he had taken for granted until it vanished. Elena had disappeared after the divorce, but Alexander Blackwood had never let her go, and he never would. Elena knew the moment she stepped outside the bookshop that something was wrong. The air felt heavier, charged with a familiarity she hadn't felt in months. Her instincts, honed during years of navigating Alexander Blackwood's world, rose sharply. She scanned the quiet street, her heartbeat steady but alert. Then she saw him. Alexander stood near the black sedan parked across the road, dressed impeccably as always, dark coat tailored to perfection, posture rigid with controlled intensity. He looked out of place in the small coastal town, like a storm cloud hovering over calm water. For a brief, irrational moment, Elena considered turning around and pretending she hadn't seen him, but she was done running. She walked toward him. Alexander's gaze locked onto her, and something in his expression shifted, relief, disbelief, and raw hunger colliding in his eyes. He took a step forward, then stopped himself, as though unsure whether he was allowed to close the distance. "Elena," he said. Her name sounded different on his lips now, less possessive, more desperate. "You shouldn't be here," she replied calmly. A muscle in his jaw flexed. "You vanished." "I left," she corrected. "There's a difference." He exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself. "You erased yourself. No phone, no accounts, no trace. Do you have any idea what that does to someone?" She laughed quietly, not cruelly, but tiredly. "You didn't seem too concerned when I was right beside you." The words landed harder than any accusation. Alexander stiffened. "That's not fair." "It's accurate," she said. "I waited years for you to notice I was disappearing even before the divorce." Silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable. "You look well," he said finally. "I am," she replied. "I'm happy." The lie tasted strange. She was freer, yes, calmer. But happy? That was still something she was learning. Alexander studied her closely, as if trying to memorize every change. Her hair was shorter, her posture looser. She no longer wore the polished armor he had once insisted she needed. "You didn't just leave me," he said quietly. "You left everything. That was the point." His eyes darkened. "You were my wife." "I was lonely," she said, constantly. That stopped him. For the first Ime. She saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "I provided for you," he said. "I protected you." "You controlled everything," she replied gently, "including me." Alexander's voice dropped. "I loved you." She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time she didn't feel small beneath his gaze. "I know," she said, "but love without presence feels like abandonment." The words hung between them like a verdict. That evening, Elena locked her door and sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Seeing Alexander again had unraveled something inside her she thought she had neatly packed away. Anger resurfaced, longing, grief, and beneath it all a dangerous awareness that despite everything, he still had power over her emotions. She hated that. Her phone buzzed. "Alexander, I'm not leaving town yet. Alexander, we need to talk." She didn't reply. Alexander had never felt more out of control. He rented the best suite in the town's only upscale hotel, but it felt suffocating. He replayed every word Elena had said, every accusation he had dismissed during their marriage. "I waited years for you to notice." How had he missed it? No, he hadn't missed it. He had chosen ambition over attention, power over presence. And now the woman he once believed would always wait for him had learned how to live without him. That realization terrified him. He didn't want possession. He wanted redemption. The next morning, Elena arrived at the bookshop early, determined to reclaim normal. Sigh. She focused on inventory, ignored the tension humming beneath her skin, and told herself Alexander would get bored and leave. He didn't. Instead, he walked into the shop just before noon. The bell chimed softly. Every nerve in her body lit up. "You can keep showing up like this," she said without looking up. "I can," he replied, "and I will until you stop pretending I don't matter." She set the book down slowly and faced him. "This isn't pretending. This is me choosing peace. At my expense." She sighed. "You weren't at peace with me." He stepped closer. "Then let me make it right." Her heart pounded. "You don't fix a marriage after the divorce. You do when the love never ended," he said. The sincerity in his voice unsettled her. "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you," she admitted. "I left because loving you was erasing me." Alexander swallowed hard. "Tell me how to find you again," he said. "Not my wife. You." Elena hesitated. This was the danger she had fled from. Not his power, but his intensity. The way he could make her feel seen in moments like this, even after years of neglect. "I don't know if that woman still wants you," she said softly. "I'll wait," he replied without hesitation. She laughed bitterly. "You never waited for anything in your life. Then this will be my first time." That night, Elena stood on the beach, staring at the dark horizon. Alexander Blackwood had entered her new life like a force of nature, refusing to stay in the past where she had tried to place him. She had disappeared after the divorce to save herself. But now, the man she once loved was standing in front of her, not as a husband, but as a man who had lost everything that mattered, and that made him far more dangerous. Because for the first time, Alexander Blackwood wasn't demanding. He was asking. Elena didn't intend to let Alexander stay in her life. That had been the plan. Clean, decisive, final. But plans unraveled easily when emotions were involved, and Alexander Blackwood was not a man who faded quietly into the background. For days he remained in town. He didn't push, didn't corner her, didn't demand explanations. Instead, he lingered on the edges of her life like a patient shadow, watching, waiting, learning, and that unsettled her more than confrontation ever had. She saw him at the cafe down the street, sipping black coffee and reading financial reports he pretended not to care about. She noticed him walking the shoreline in the early mornings, his suit replaced by rolled sleeves and bare feet, as if he were trying to understand the simplicity she had chosen. "You don't belong here," she said one afternoon when he finally approached her on the pier. "I know," he replied, "but I'm trying. That word alone shook her resolve. Alexander had dismantled his schedule without hesitation. Board meetings were postponed. International calls went unanswered. His executive team was furious, confused, and increasingly concerned. "You're risking everything." His skull warned him over the phone. "I already lost the one thing that mattered," Alexander replied coldly. "Everything else is replaceable." For the first time in his life, power didn't satisfy him. Elena watched from a distance, unsure how to process the changes in him. He wasn't the relentless man who once measured time in profit margins and leverage. This Alexander listened more than he spoke. He asked questions and accepted silence as an answer. Still, she kept her distance. "You think a few days of effort erase years of absence?" she asked one evening when he found her locking up the bookshop. "No," he said honestly, "but I think consistency might." She scoffed. "You've never been consistent with anything except your ambition, and look where that got me." Her chest tightened at the rawness in his voice. One night a storm rolled in unexpectedly, drenching the town in rain and thunder. The power went out, leaving the streets dark and silent. Elena lit candles in her small apartment, the sound of rain pressing against the windows like a memory she couldn't escape. A knock came at the door. She knew who it was before she opened it. Alexander stood there, soaked, hair damp, jacket discarded, looking less like a billionaire and more like a man who had nowhere else to go. "You shouldn't be here," she said again. "I had nowhere else to be," he replied. She stepped aside reluctantly. They sat across from each other, candlelight flickering between them, shad owls dancing on the walls. The intimacy of the space stripped away pretense. There was nowhere to hide. "I never meant to break you," he said quietly. "I know," Elena replied, "but intent doesn't erase damage." He nodded. "I took you for granted. I thought love was something stable, something that didn't need maintenance. I was wrong." Silence settled, heavy but necessary. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she admitted. "I don't expect you to," he said. "I just want the chance to earn it." Her eyes stung and she hated herself for it. The next morning news broke. Alexander Blackwood had stepped down temporarily from his position as CEO. The headlines exploded. Blackwood takes unexpected leave. Billionaire disappears from boardroom. Elena stared at her phone in disbelief. "You didn't do this for me," she said later when she confronted him. "I did it because I needed to understand who I am without the empire," he replied. "And because I lost you chasing something that never loved me back." "You're risking everything." "I already did," he said softly. "Years ago. I just didn't realize it then." That scared her. Not because she didn't believe him, but because she did. They began spending time together cautiously. Not dates, walks, conversations, shared silences. He helped her organize shelves at the shop. He learned the names of her customers. He listened to stories she had once told him that he'd been too distracted to hear. "You always loved the ocean," he said one evening. She looked at him sharply. "You never noticed. I'm noticing now." She didn't know whether to forgive him for that. One afternoon, Elena received a call that shook her fragile sense of peace. The Blackwood estate was being sold. Her past was being dismantled piece by piece. Alexander found her sitting on the beach, knees drawn to her chest. "You're really letting go," she said. "Yes," he replied, "because I don't want a life that doesn't include you, even if that means starting over." Starting over. That had been her dream. "I disappeared to save myself," she said. "I can't go back to who I was." "I don't want you to," he replied. "I want to meet who you are now." Her breath caught. This was the man she had once begged to see her, and now he did. But seeing wasn't the same as healing. That night, Elena dreamed of the past, the early days of their marriage, laughter, hope, and the slow erosion she hadn't noticed until it was too late. She woke with tears on her cheeks. Alexander stood at her door the next morning, ready to leave town. "I won't trap you," he said. "I won't chase you if you tell me to stop." She searched his face, seeing sincerity instead of entitlement. "Don't go," she said quietly. Hope flickered in his eyes, but he stayed still. "Not because I'm ready," she added, "but because I need to know whether this is real." "I'll stay," he said, "as long as it takes." Elena turned away, heart racing. She had disappeared after the divorce to reclaim herself. Now, the man she left behind was changing in ways she never imagined. And the hardest truth of all, part of her wanted to believe him. Elena had always believed that leaving was the hardest part. She was wrong. Staying, while the past clawed its way back into her present, was far more dangerous. Alexander's continued presence in the coastal town changed the rhythm of her life in subtle but undeniable ways. People noticed him now, not as a billionaire, but as the man who waited, the one who helped unload shipments at dawn, who repaired the bookstore's broken shelves without being asked, who listened more than he spoke. It unsettled her, because this version of Alexander was everything she had once hoped he could be, and that made resisting him harder than running ever had. The call came on a Thursday morning. "Elena," the voice said briskly, professional and unwelcome, "this is Miriam Cole. Legal counsel for Blackwood Holdings. We need to discuss the divorce settlement. Elena's stomach dropped. There's nothing to discuss. It was finalized. Circumstances have changed, Miriam replied. Mr. Blackwood's restructuring has triggered asset reevaluations. Your name is still attached to several foundations. Attached. She ended the call with shaking hands. The life she had abandoned was reaching for her again. When she confronted Alexander that evening, he didn't deny it. I didn't know they would contact you directly, he said. But yes, the board is pushing back. They think I'm unrave. Ling. You are, Elena said sharply, and they're dragging me into it. I never wanted to involve you, he replied, but I won't pretend I didn't hope you'd see what I'm willing to lose. That's not fair, she said. You don't prove love by self-destruction. Alexander looked at her steadily. No, I prove it by changing. She turned away, heart pounding. This was the collision she had feared, the moment where love and freedom demanded incompatible choices. The board arrived 2 days later. Black cars, suits, power. They stood out like predators among the quiet town, their presence a reminder of everything Elena had fled. She watched from across the street as Alexander faced them outside the hotel, his posture calm but unyielding. You're making an emotional mistake, one of them snapped. You've already lost your wife. Don't lose your company too. Alexander's voice was cold. I lost my wife because I chose the company. Elena's breath caught, and I won't make that mistake twice. That night, Elena confronted her reflection in the mirror. She had built a life on invisibility, on escape, on the belief that peace required distance from love. But Alexander's transformation forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. She had healed enough to feel again, and feeling meant risk. The past arrived fully the following morning. Tabloids. A headline splashed across screens everywhere. Billionaire CEO chases ex-wife after divorce meltdown. Photos of Elena surfaced. Old ones, from galas, from a life she barely recognized. Her name trended. Her anonymity shattered. She closed the bookshop early and fled to the beach, chest tight, breath uneven. Alexander found her there, eyes burning with fury, not at her but at himself. I'll shut it down, he said immediately. I'll bury them legally. No, she said quietly, this is the cost of letting you stay. His expression softened. I never wanted to hurt you again. I know, she said, but love doesn't erase consequences. She turned to face him fully. I disappeared because I needed control over my own life. I can't lose that again. He nodded slowly. Then don't. Her heart twisted. It's not that simple. It is, he said. Choose yourself. I'll accept whatever space that requires. She searched his face, expecting resistance. There was none, only acceptance. And that terrified her more than his pursuit ever had. That evening, Elena packed a bag, not to run, but to decide. Alexander watched from the doorway of her apartment as she folded clothes carefully. Are you leaving? He asked quietly. I don't know, she answered honestly. I need to remember who I am without reacting to you. He stepped back. Then go. She paused, stunned. Just like that? I love you enough to let you walk away again, he said. If why? Oh, come back. It should be because you want me, not because I chased you. Tears slipped down her cheeks. This was the man she had needed years ago, and now he was here. Too late or exactly on time. Elena spent the night driving the coastline, memories and possibilities colliding in her mind. She stopped at a cliff overlooking the ocean, wind tearing at her hair. She realized something then. She hadn't disappeared after the divorce to escape Alexander. She had disappeared to find herself, and now that she had, she could choose differently. At dawn, she returned. Alexander was still there, sitting on the steps of her building, sleepless, but waiting. She stopped in front of him. I'm not your wife, she said. I know, he replied. I won't live in your shadow. I wouldn't let you, he said. I won't disappear again. I don't want you to, he said softly. She took a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge. Then we start as equals, she said. No ownership, no control, no guarantees. A slow smile broke across his face, reverent, relieved, humbled. I don't need guarantees, he said. I just need the chance to walk beside you. She extended her hand, not as his wife, not as his past, but as herself. And for the first time, Alexander Blackwood didn't take. He accepted. Elena learned something important in the days that followed. Love felt different when it was no longer tangled with fear. She and Alexander moved slowly, deliberately, as though handling something fragile and rare. There were no grand declarations, no press statements, no public appearances designed to rewrite a narrative. Just two people relearning each other without titles, without expectations, without the invisible chains that had once bound them. Alexander no longer stayed at the hotel. He rented a small house near the edge of town, modest, quiet, anonymous. No staff, no entourage, no boardroom calls echoing through the halls. Elena noticed everything. The way he cooked simple meals and burned half of them. The way he listened, truly listened, without interrupting or correcting. The way he waited for her decisions instead of steering them. You're uncomfortable without control, she said one evening as they walked along the shore. He nodded. But I'm learning that control isn't the same as strength. She smiled faintly. It took me leaving for you to see that. Yes, he admitted. And I hate that. But you see it now, she said. That matters. The world, however, was not done testing them. Alexander's temporary leave became permanent when the board issued an ultimatum: return to the role fully, or step aside for good. His reputation had taken a hit, investors restless and impatient. Elena read the news in silence. That night, she found him sitting on the porch of his rental house, staring out at the dark ocean. They want an answer by morning, he said quietly. She sat beside him. And I already know what I'm choosing. She turned to him sharply. Alexander, I'm no giving up my life for you, he interrupted gently. I'm choosing a life that doesn't cost me you. Her throat tightened. You don't have to sacrifice everything, she said. I'm not, he replied. I'm redefining it. The next morning, Alexander Blackwood resigned, not quietly, not dramatically, simply, finally. The headlines exploded, again, but this time Elena didn't run. She locked the bookshop door, stood by the window, and breathed through the anxiety. She wasn't disappearing anymore. Alexander arrived that evening with no celebration, no triumph, only calm. It's done, he said. And you're okay? She asked. He nodded. For the first time in a long time, they sat together in silence, watching the sky darken. I won't ask you to build your life around me, he said. I won't follow you if you leave again. I won't cage you with promises or guilt. She studied him carefully. And what will you do? I'll stay, he said, if you let me. As a man who loves you, not a billionaire who owns a version of you. Tears slipped down her cheeks before she could stop them. This was all I ever wanted, she whispered. To be chosen, not claimed. Alexander reached for her hand, hesitating just enough to let her pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Months passed. Quietly, gently. Elena expanded the bookshop, turning it into a small community space. Readings, coffee, laughter. Her name meant something again, but on her own terms. Alexander invested, not in empires but in people. Local projects, small businesses, causes that didn't demand headlines. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes old wounds resurfaced. But they faced them together, without running, without control, without disappearing. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the ocean in gold, Alexander took Elena back to the beach, where she had once decided whether to leave him behind forever. "I don't have a ring," he said quietly, "and I won't ask you to be anything you don't want to be." She looked at him, heart steady. "But I do want to ask something," he continued. "Will you choose me, not because of who I was, but because of who I am now?" Elena stepped closer, the wind tugging at her hair. "I already have," she said softly. He exhaled, a sound of relief so deep it bordered on disbelief. She took his face in her hands. "I disappeared after the divorce because I needed to save myself." "I know," he said. "But I came back," she continued, "because love shouldn't require vanishing." She kissed him, not with desperation, not with fear, but with certainty. The world would always remember Alexander Blackwood as a billionaire, but Elena knew him as something far rarer, a man who learned too late, but not too late to change, a man who lost everything he thought mattered, and found what truly did, a man who refused to let her go, not by force but by becoming worthy of staying. And Elena, she never disappeared again, not for love, not for fear, not for anyone. She stood in the light, chosen, not claimed. More stories will keep coming, so please don't forget to like and subscribe.